Amnesty International is calling out major tech companies, including Apple, Microsoft, Sony, Nokia, and Samsung, for their alleged links to illegally sourced cobalt in the Congo. So RT reports on this. Children are forced to work in subhuman conditions and under constant threat of violence. The organization says the minerals used in household appliances the world over is largely sourced from child labor that goes on deep inside hazardous mines and tunnels. Now, to be specific, cobalt is mostly used today in the form of rechargeable batteries for phones and laptops. And apparently, it's necessary for those things. And 50% of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So, you know, you have this problem here where you have 50% of it, half of it coming from that region, and there's forced labor going on down the supply chain in order to get it and then give it to the big multinationals, and then they sell it for a tremendous profit. So they continue here, quote, "It was found that the precious mineral was making its way into the products of 16 major multinationals, and kids as young as 7 were working in the mines. They're paid $1 a day, they work for 12 hours, and face not only health hazards, but also the ugliness of the DRC's political situation, marked by daily violence, extortion, and intimidation. And also there are deadly effects of cobalt exposure, and they have no protective gear." So this is the kind of stuff, man. Like, when you think of, you know, the typical, like, hippie-ish or hipster-ish college kid who's like, bro, down with the corporations, bro, woo, let's do LSD. Like, when you think of those, man, we all mock them and, yeah, assholes, yada, yada, and, you know, sometimes they get goofy on social issues, and they're called SJWs, social justice warriors, the authoritarian left. When they get angry, though, and they talk about corporate America and all the problems, this is really what they're fucking talking about, and they're not wrong. Okay, this idea that some on the right have, this fake, this bullshit, no-nonsense idea of like, yeah, a critic of American capitalism. Don't be ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with it. It brings you everything good. Well, no, it's a mixed situation. So, you know, on some issues, is capitalism better than socialism and government-run systems? Yes, I always say cars is the perfect example. The cars that came out of the Soviet Union, out of communism, were horrendous. There was no competition, so they just sucked. The ones that came out of the U.S. were actually really good. So, yeah, capitalism is better on some issues, for sure. But is there also a documented history of flat-out exploitation in order to get the resources to use in a capitalist structure that the corporations use to make goods for us? Yeah, you can't deny that, man. I mean, we've covered the story of the Banana Wars. A lot of you guys probably don't even know what that is, but the Banana Wars is when the U.S. government invaded countries in Central and South America and toppled the government so that we could steal the bananas for the Chiquita Banana Company. Isn't that amazing? Like, people don't... This is stuff that we should be taught, and it should be hammered home that this is bad, but we don't teach it because kind of in many ways we're still involved in this kind of activity today. It's not as overt and in your face, but there are weird for-profit motivations going on behind the scenes, imperialist ventures. You would think that we'd all look at that and go, yeah, not good. No, you shouldn't knock out democratic governments, put in an authoritarian leader, and steal resources. Kind of fucked up. But we're doing the functional equivalent of that today when we go to the Congo and we're like, okay, for our corporations who want to sell cheap-ass laptops and phones, let's get the cobalt, force the kids into slave labor, and no protective gear whatsoever, and it's all good. No, it's not all good. It's not all good. Now, it's hard because when you hear this, 16 fucking giant multinationals are engaged in this, it's almost like you're overwhelmed. How do I stop this? How am I gonna stop this? Everybody I know has a fucking iPhone or something that at some point down the line goes back to slave labor. What do I do? What do I do? Well, on that one, I don't have the answer for you, man. I mean, look, I'm a political science guy, as everybody knows, so what I see is the structural problem, and the way you fix that is just simply having a government that's not corrupt and bought off by these same multinational corporations. So you have rules and regulations that makes sense where you don't allow getting it from places like this with forced child labor. But in order to get to that point, you need to get the money out of the political system so the corporations can't buy the politicians and get what the fuck they want. We need a government that is going to say, oh, well, if you're going to bring in cheap materials from over there and it's tied to slave labor, we're going to tax you and quadruple the cost of your product. And they'll go, well, that's stupid. Why would you do that when if I didn't use the slave labor, then I could just double the price and it wouldn't be 4 times as high? To which I would respond, exactly. So go buy the right fucking materials. The cost of your phone might go up a little bit. Instead of being $150, perhaps it is $300. But if that's the fucking price to not have child slaves in the Congo, I'm willing to pay it. I don't know about you guys. I mean, it's a race to the bottom the way it is right now. Lower consumer prices. We need lower consumer prices. But then at the end of the line, it's tied to fucking kids dying in a mine, in a cobalt mine, involved in slave labor in the middle of a war zone. We all got to have basic decency to prevent that. So look, I support 100% anybody who moves away from getting these kinds of products. In fact, I want to start trying to do that. I mean, I'll admit I'm a hypocrite. Right now I have an iPhone. Now, I didn't know at the time when I got an iPhone that it was tied to all this stuff. But I support moving in that direction on a personal level. So we should all buy phones that are not tied to this stuff. But since so many of them are tied to it, you need the systemic reform. You need to make it so that you get money out of politics. The corporations can't buy the politicians to let them get away with this. You need politicians that'll do the right thing and will represent the people and will tax the fuck out of corporations that try to exploit slave labor. But right now it's systemic, man. Right now this is everyday stuff. And all, these multinationals pretend like, oh, we're down with liberal causes and we care about people, and then you chase their fucking supply line and there's child slaves at the end of it. It's bullshit, man. It's bullshit. And I don't mean it in that hipster, hippie-ish way of revolution, woo! No, I mean, from a position of basic human decency and not being a dick. You look at this and you go, we got to reform the system. Again, I'm not for overthrowing capitalism and putting in communism. I think that's silly. I think history shows that indeed hasn't worked. But we need a government that's not corrupt, and we need a social democratic system where if you have capitalism, you don't let it run amok, where it's based on exploitation and militarism and slave labor in third world countries.